Thank you so much. So it's nice to see everyone. It's nice to be here. And so I'm going to be talking about libraries of programmatic policies. So what do I mean by this? So I really want to make our learning agents. And here we're talking about sequential decision making and the agents just interacting with the world and learning to act as it interacts with the world. So I want to make our learning agents more like software engineers in the sense that I want them to generate knowledge and be able to reuse knowledge. And when we're writing systems as programmers, then we never write the program or the whole system from scratch every single time, right? We're going to reuse code as much as possible. So I want our agents to have similar abilities. So sometimes I call this a programmatic mindset for research in machine learning and AI. And I think this is fair to say, given that programs are actually everywhere. And we had all these very interesting talks in the morning. So I have just going to steal a few of these examples, like, for example, the embryonic development. You can see like the cell structure as the machine where we're running a program, and the program is simply the genome that's going to tell us exactly what to do so that we become who we are eventually. Or if you think about the computational theory of mind, then you have a bunch of programs running in your brain. And it would be interesting to understand this and understand how they work. So they're essentially everywhere. And I think it's fair for us to try to see representations that we're going to use with our agents as programs, even if they do not look exactly like the kind of programs that we would expect. And we're going to come back to this later. And so the type of problems that we're going to be dealing with, and because we have this reinforcement learning setting, I think it's fair that I'm going to give you some real world examples. So this is Karel the robot, normally used to teach kids how to write computer code, but can also be used as a benchmark problem for sequential decision making. So we could just tell the robot, hey, in order to solve this problem, you got to collect all the markers that are touching the wall. And maybe this is a solution to this problem. And the agent initially doesn't know that it needs to do this. So it's going to interact with the world and then eventually find out that, hey, I got to collect all these things. So one way of solving this problem is actually to write a program that's going to solve this for us. So maybe the program is going to look like this. So on the right-hand side, we have what we call a policy. It's a policy because it's telling the agent exactly what to do in every single step along the way. So it's essentially checking if there is a marker, then I'm going to continue running this code, and I'm going to pick up the marker, and eventually I have to turn left because I'm just facing the wall. So that's essentially what's going on with this program here. And very often we're going to call this a programmatic policy because we have this program encoding the policy. And on the left-hand side is just a reinforcement learning problem. So we're not going to make very strong assumptions, just that we have the agent interacting with the environment, and the agent needs to learn how to interact with the environment. And then the big question here is, how do we search over the space of possible programs so that we can find a program that's doing the thing that we want it to do? And then you can take this to your problem. Like you can possibly frame whatever problem that you're working on under this big umbrella. Like, how do I find a program that's going to solve the problem that I'm interested in solving? So this is the very big question, searching for programs. And in this case, we're going to be searching for programmatic policies in the context of reinforcement learning. So one thing that we need to do is to define the search space, so where we're going to be searching over. And this is normally done by defining a language. So the language is going to define the space that we're going to search over. And then we need to now define, so how do we do this? Well, in order to do this, I need to define a search procedure. How am I going to go about this space and find a program that I'm actually looking for? So then there are these two pieces that I want to make it very concrete. I'm going to give you a very simple example of how we can instantiate the search space and how we can instantiate the search procedure. And everything is going to be very simple, but we're going to build up on that later. So for defining the search space, we're going to define a programming language. And one way of defining this is through, let's say, a context-free grammar, where we're essentially defining what are the strings that we're going to accept for the programs that we're going to search over in this space. So in this case here, we have capital S as the initial symbol. There's a bunch of production rules that we can apply so that we can transform this initial string into something else. And because I'm actually teaching this week, so tomorrow I'm going to be teaching online, my students at the University of Alberta. So I feel like teaching now as well. So I'm going to ask you a quiz. And the quiz is, can this program actually be written in this language? And the answer should be yes, because we can apply a sequence of production rules that's going to transform the capital S into the program that we have on the screen. So that's essentially what we're going to do when we're searching in the space. We're going to get concrete programs like the one that we have here at the bottom after applying a bunch of production rules. And we're going to call here this program as a candidate solution. So it's a candidate solution in the context of a local search. We're going to search over the space of programs, and we're going to consider possible programs for solving the problem. So that's how we define this space. Whatever is accepted by this language, it's something that we can consider in our search. But how do we represent these programs in memory? Well, we're going to use an abstract syntax tree, which is essentially a tree representing the program in memory. And this is convenient because now we can use this structure to define operations like mutation so that we can go about the space and find the programs that we're looking for. All right, so in this tree, we have internal nodes as the non-terminal symbols of the language. And if you look at the leaf nodes, they are actually given the program that we have at the top. So this is essentially the terminal symbols that we have in the language. OK, so that's a space, but that's not enough. In order to go about the space searching for a solution, we need to define what we call a neighborhood function. So the neighborhood function is essentially giving a structure of how we're going to go about the space and find the program that you're looking for. So we're going to do this in a stochastic way, where let's say that we have this program on the left-hand side. And in order to get a neighbor so that I can give structure to the space, I'm just going to select at random one of the symbols representing a non-terminal symbol from the language, one of the nodes representing a non-terminal symbol. For example, let's say that we get this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this away. And I'm just going to generate another subtree randomly by applying the production rules of the language, just like how we did in the previous slides. So just I'm going to toss this away, and I'm going to plug a new subtree on this side. So then I'm going to call this a neighbor. And hopefully this neighbor is going to give us some structure. Like you're going to see that this program is somewhat similar to this one, but it has some stuff that's actually different. And this is going to be important later as we define the landscape that we're going to search over in this space. There could be neighbors where, let's say, we just select the initial symbol here, the root of the tree, and we might change entirely the structure of the program, and the neighbor is going to be entirely different. Yes, please.
I'm confused about why C is labeled a branch on the top, but not branching on the second.
This one here?
Yeah, branch is there, but then is single.
Yeah, so there are two production rules in this language, which I'm not showing you here. So you could replace the initial symbol by two symbols Cs, and then you can replace each one of them by something else. So we have a little bit of flexibility of how we define this. But the neighborhood function is stochastic because we're randomly choosing a node in the tree, and then we're going to randomly choose a sequence of production rules so that we get a new subtree to be plugged on the side. So it's essentially a mutation operation that we're doing here. It's like technology from the 90s. We're talking about genetic programming here with a very simple search procedure. So then how do we search? And I'm only going to allow myself to do very simple search in this case. So we're going to do hill climbing in this case. So let's say that we have our language that's defining this space. We have a neighborhood function that, given a current candidate solution, will give us a bunch back. And we're going to generate a random program. And that's going to be the seed of the search. That's how we're going to seed the search. And that's going to allow us to go through the space of possible programs. So we just go through all the different production rules. And let's say that at the end, we get the program there at the bottom. Just going to represent the program by a little circle. And this little circle, it's going to be mapped onto a space. So the space here is given by this figure on the right-hand side. And I'm just going to map it somewhere in the space. So then the search is going to be super greedy. It's just like hill climbing with this very stochastic neighborhood function, where I'm going to generate a bunch of neighbors, and I'm going to evaluate the neighbors. And the evaluation here will really depend on the problem that we're trying to solve. If it's a reinforcement learning problem, maybe we're going to roll out this policy and see what is the average return, and we're going to pick the best one. And I'm going to denote the best one by the bullets that are going to blink. Let's say that that's the best neighbor we have, and that's an improvement over the current candidate solution. We're going to jump there, and we're going to do the same thing again from that candidate solution. going to evaluate the neighbors, go to the best one, and then eventually we're going to get to the point where we just cannot improve the current solution, and that's a local optimum. That's where we're going to stop. So very naive search procedure, and that's all we're going to do. But then we're going to apply a very important trick, which is to restart, restart, and restart. So the more we restart the search, we're going to start from different places of this space, and the neighborhood function is also going to be stochastic. So that's going to allow us to do a little bit of exploration in this space. So this is super simple. This is like 90s technology, and it's really getting genetic programming and taking most of genetic out of it and just using hill climbing search. And I want this to be as simple as possible. Yes, please.
So I understand simplicity. So there are no loops, for loops, or anything like in these programs?
You could, and then you run into all sort of trouble. Like maybe your programs are never going to finish. You need to define a bound of number of iterations. It is possible, but it definitely gets a little bit more complicated. Let's just stick with some more simpler language for now. But the kind of experiments that we run, we do have loops in them as well. Okay. All right, so let me go back to this slide. Yes, David, right?
Yeah, yes, very, very interesting stuff. Alessandro, I assume you're here somewhere.
I'm not allowed to cross this line.
Yeah, okay. Because, anyway, because he also might be interested in this. What you're talking about here, are you concerned about Turing completeness of your languages?
No, not right now, not right now. So let's just stick with any language you want. Maybe it's not Turing complete, maybe it is. I'm just defining a search space and a search procedure over this space.
Okay, and the goal here, as opposed to, as you said, goes back to the 90s, GP, Lisp, functional programming more generally. Why are you coming up with something new? What is it that you
Oh, that's a great question, and we're going to get there. So we're going to get there in a minute, but that's exactly where I want to go. So we're back at this slide, right? So we need to define a search space and a search procedure. And what I want to do personally, and in my research group, is that I do not want to focus on the second one. So I did quite a bit of work on search in combinatorial spaces. If you do have a search problem, if you need help, let me know. I might be able to help. But it's not something that I want to do myself at this point. But just out of curiosity, if you like program synthesis and you like bottom-up search, this is an algorithm one of my students invented. I think it's one of the most beautiful search algorithms I've ever seen. If you're interested, I can tell you more about it. But this is the kind of stuff that we're not doing right now. Because I really want to focus on the search space. And on the search space, I want to have a very simple search algorithm. I'm going to say, you know what? I'm only allowed to do this stochastic hill climbing, and that's all we're going to do. But in order to be able to solve problems with such a simple search algorithm, we better have a good representation. So then the trouble is, how do we find a representation so that we can make the search super easy? And I'm going to tell you two ways of doing this today. So this is more or less a roadmap of what's to come, and that's also to answer your question, David. So the first one is learning semantic spaces. And I might be in trouble with this one because I was listening to Stephanie's talk this morning, and we might have to reconcile some of the stuff I'm going to discuss here today, which might contradict some of her results. But I'm looking forward to having this conversation. So this is one way of having a better representation. The other one, which might be somewhat not very intuitive, is to actually try to bypass the synthesis process entirely. So instead of trying to do this discrete search in the space of programs, the one I described before, what if we just take the programs out of neural networks? And I'm going to show you how to do it with MLPs. So very simple neural networks, but it can be very effective, and we can find cool stuff, for example, that we have modules inside some of these neural networks. Okay, so the roadmap is that we're going to go through this one, and then we're going to go through this one. Before getting to the details of the semantic spaces, I actually want to tell the story of how we got to work on this. So there was this paper. It was describing a system called Leaps. And this is a paper that came out on NeurIPS, I believe, 2021. And I was super excited with this work. Like, it's the kind of paper that when you read it the first time, you're super excited about it. And you read it again and again, and you start running experiments. And you get to the point that I almost own this paper. Right? It's mine. I know it so well that I feel like it's mine, but it's not. there are some really cool ideas here. So let me just explain you what's going on in this paper and how we moved from here onto the semantic spaces that I mentioned before. So the idea is that we're going to start, so this image that I'm going to show, it's coming from the paper at the bottom. So we're going to start with a program row, and we're going to learn a latent space for this program with the usual reconstruction loss. So the idea is that we're going to have this latent vector here in the middle that's going to represent the programs that we have on the right-hand side. And we have the reconstruction loss right there. But then what I really like about this approach is that they do not stop here. They actually came up with two other losses that would try to have a representation that will make this space friendly to search. So the idea is essentially to have two vectors. They're going to be close to each other in the space if they're going to decode to programs with similar semantics. So you want to see similar agent behavior as you decode these two vectors. And the way to get this is to look at the actions that the original program is taking in the environment, and then look at the action that the reconstructed program is taking in the environment, and then we're going to construct a loss function out of this. Because even if this program is very different in terms of syntax from this one, but they're behaving exactly the same, then I'm good. I'm good because I know that I'm forcing the vectors in this latent space that will decode into programs with similar behavior to be near each other in this space, which is great for search, because then now we have this locality of behavior in the search space. And I think this is a great idea. And they have a second loss function that's doing essentially the same thing, but instead of getting the reconstructed program, they're just running through a neural network. And this neural network is conditioned on the latent vector. It's going to give you a sequence of actions, and then we compare with the sequence of actions of the original program. So it's essentially trying to encode the knowledge that we have here into these two little boxes here. So again, it's trying to place together vectors in the space that they're going to be next to each other if they behave in a similar way. Once you learn a space like this, I will take a question before I tell you what happens next.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, how do you encode the program so that this is possible? Like, and I apologize if that question's like a lot of details to answer, but
no, that's totally fine. This is it's really trying to compress a bunch of programs that you generate. You're going to use the same structure that we had before. You have a context-free grammar of this language. You generated a bunch of programs, and now you're going to try to train these two models, the encoder and decoder, so that you have a good internal representation here, this latent representation that's able to decode into different programs. So the idea is we're going to use this now. So now here's my search space. And now the search space will have like the properties that we're looking for. Like I want to have this behavioral locality so that the search is going to be easier that way. So I'm going to do search instead of in that very discrete space that we have from the 90s. Now we have this nice and smooth space that's very modern. Yes, you have a question.
Tiny question. What's the difference between LL and LR?
Oh, so these are two loss functions. One is coming from whatever is decoded from here. The other one is whatever is decoded from here. But the idea is exactly the same. I want to compare this action with this action with this action, and I'll do the same here. This action with this one, and so on. But it's just the nature of where these actions are coming from. So one is coming from a decoded program, and this one is coming from this distribution that's produced by a neural network. So this little box here is a neural network. But the idea is the same.
Why do we want the middle one? Why isn't just comparing the reconstructed program and the original program sufficient?
You mean comparing these two sequences?
Oh, comparing the program P and P hat.
This one and this one. So this is what these loss here is doing. So this loss at the top is making sure that the strings that you provide as input, they can be reconstructed here. But if you only use this one, and they have a nice ablation study in their paper showing that the search becomes harder. And that makes sense, because now you only care about syntax, but maybe you should be caring about something else. And it could be performance, or it could be the behavior given by the actions of the agent. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, so how do we use this? We use this to search. So then we're going to use a cross-entropy method. I thought that David was going to explain the cross-entropy method, so I get to explain it here then. The idea is very similar to a hill climbing search, but we're doing it in a continuous space. So we just generate a candidate latent program, which is just a vector in the space. And then we apply noise to it so that we get a bunch of neighbors. And once we have a bunch of neighbors, how do we evaluate them? Well, we're going to decode all these neighbors so that we get a program. And once we have the program, we can run this program in the environment, and then we see how well it's doing. And once we know how well it's doing, we can use the reward that we get in the environment so that we can label each one of these samples. And then we do the usual search approach where we're going to prefer the ones that are more promising according to the reward function. The trouble is, this is very nice. I love the ideas here. The trouble is that if we compare this with the technology from the 90s that we had, actually the technology from the 90s is better. So I just want to show you one result. This is the only result slide that I have. I don't want to bother you too much with results. But this is a problem from Karel the robot. And on the y-axis, we have the return. So you want to maximize this. And this is like the sampling complexity. So you want to you want to get to the top of the y-axis on the left-hand side of the x-axis. And it looks like this. We have 3 methods. This is the hill climbing approach I showed you before, searching what we're going to call now the syntax space, which is just using this structure from the 90s so that we can do the search. And these are 2 search algorithms for this latent space, the one that we learn. And then what we see is something like this. And that's across different problems all the time. So then the big question is, how can we learn about the leaps work with all these super cool ideas, but then try to join forces with the technology that we have from the 90s. So that's how we got started on learning these, what I call the semantic spaces. So the key idea here, it's really coming from the LEAPS paper, where neighbor programs, they should be different in terms of behavior, so that I can make progress. They should be different, but it should be similar to the current one. So I want to see a little bit of diversity, but at the same time, there should be this behavioral locality. So that's really what we're looking for. And if I have to draw a cartoonish version of what is a syntax space, it would look like this. So it would be an optimization landscape full of plateaus. And the reason why that we have these plateaus, and I learned this morning, it's called neutral mutations, because you make a mutation on a program, and this program is going to behave exactly the same as before. And we actually collected data. So semantically identical neighbors, if you're dealing with this 90s way of expressing the search space, what we call the syntax space. 1 out of 5 neighbors, so very close to Stephanie's numbers. 1 out of 5 will be identical. So then you're going through your space, you're generating the neighbors, and then once you get a neighbor, you look at the neighbor and say, hey, you're behaving exactly the same as the current one. So that sounds like a little bit of a waste of time from the search perspective. We're just stuck in all these plateaus, and that's slowing down search. That's our intuition. So then what if we can approximate the semantic space? So I hope that the semantic space is going to look more like this. If I define a space where I can actually look at the neighbor and see a neighbor that's going to behave differently from the current candidate solution, then we might have a better optimization landscape that's going to be friendly to the simple search algorithms that we're dealing with. And if we collect data for the semantic spaces, which I'm going to tell you how we do it, then we go from 1 out of 5 to 1 out of 50. So we're really, getting rid of all these plateaus that we have in our search, and we're definitely getting some better optimization landscape. Yes, Stephanie, please.
I guess, so this is really interesting, obviously. I'm a little confused about how you decide whether or not a neighbor is semantically identical. For some examples, like my examples, it's pretty easy because you've got a test suite. But if you have a robot that's doing any kind of complex task, how do you decide if they're identical semantically?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So the question is, how do we define whether a neighbor is identical in terms of behavior compared to the current candidate solution? So we do this by using data. So it's actually very similar to the way that you do it. We're not dealing with robotics. We're dealing with grid worlds where we have full control of what's going on. We have some games that we're trying this on as well. So what we can do is that we can save a bunch of states and then ask the question, how are you going to behave in this state if you just roll out this policy. And then we compare the two rollouts.
So you have some enumerated
Exactly.
set of tests.
Exactly. So it's very similar to the supervised learning approach that you had. So in that way we can, it's not necessarily exact, but it's a good approximation for us to see what's going on. Yes, please.
I might venture that there might be a better distinction between what you've called syntax space and semantic space. This is actually about representations. And so what you have on the top is the representations you get out of trees.
Mm-hmm.
So out of the parsed trees that you get from your, and what you have on the bottom is an embedding space. It's simply
Oh,
an
no,
embedding
no. So I'm going to clear that up. So in the bottom, it's still trees. I haven't showed you how we do this. So this is not the leaps, the latent representation that we learn with neural networks. This is something else. I haven't told you yet how we do this. I'm going to show you now. So let's move to the next slide. So we do this by learning a library of programs. So it's the setting where the agent is getting just a stream of problems, is getting to learn how to solve the stream of problems. And then once you learn how to solve a problem, you're going to get that solution, and you're going to add it to the library of programs. You don't have to do it for the entire program. You can actually break it down. So that's the beauty of having this type of representation, is that we have a very large library of different programs. So here's how we do it. So we're going to provide as input, like the MDP is just the reinforcement learning problem, and the DSL is the language, is domain-specific language. We provide this as input, and then let's say that we learn a policy to solve one of these problems. And then the policy is given there by some program. I wrote some random program that's solving this problem. And then what we do is that we're going to break down this program into sub-programs so that we have a large collection of possible programs. And we're going to call this, because we're dealing in the setting of reinforcement learning, we call these options. So if you're not familiar with options in reinforcement learning, it's essentially a function that the agent can call, and the option, this function, is going to hijack the agent for a number of steps. It's going to tell the agent exactly what to do, and eventually it's going to return so that the agent can decide on the actions again. So we have all these set of options, and then what we do with this is that now we define a new neighborhood function. So the semantic space will be defined by changing the way that we generate the neighbors, like I showed you before in the syntax space. So what we're going to keep here in the set of options, we're going to make sure that each one of these options, they have a given behavior, a well-defined behavior. So we're going to do the rollouts like we discussed, Stephanie, so that we know that each one of these entries, they have a specified behavior. And then when doing the mutation in the tree here, so let's say that this is our current candidate solution. The circle is just representing one program in this space. And that's our program. Let's say that this is the program. We're searching for a solution. So we generate the neighbors. But then the way that we're going to generate the neighbors, let me show you n prime here, a neighbor of n, is that we're going to get one of the subtrees. And let's say that the subtrees is instruction C4. And I'm going to replace the whole thing by a program that I have in my library. So instead of randomly generating stuff here, I'm going to pick something from the library, and I'm going to plug into this tree. So it's really the idea of trying to generate a neighbor that has a different behavior, because I'm plugging something that has a well-defined behavior into a program. So that way, we're approximating the underlying semantic space of the problem. It's really like creating shortcuts in this space. If you remember Stephanie's graph from this talk in the morning, we had this graph where we could jump into different places so that you could fix the problem. So this is more or less what we're trying to do, if I understand correctly what's going on in your work, Stephanie. But we're trying to make connections in the space so that we can jump to different places. And as we jump to different places, we're approximating the semantic space. OK, but we won't stop here. So then now we're going to use this for search. Yes, David, you have a pressing question.
I'll be quick. In evolutionary biology, neutral landscapes have many advantages. You do want to stay on a neutral landscape for a very, very long time, because that's giving you a repertoire of modifications, none of which would have been suitable by themselves, and so on and so forth. You are here explicitly saying, I'm going to sacrifice ability for this one?
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it puzzling? That's what I want to reconcile with Stephanie tomorrow at lunch, hopefully. So I can try to understand this better. because it seems counterintuitive. Like, if I only look at this problem, let's make the search problem better, this makes a lot of sense. But then we have this counterexample from biology, and maybe it's there for a different reason. So I'd love to understand this better. So how do we use the space to do search? So the synthesis will happen by the usual approach. We're going to draw the sample from some initial distribution, like we randomly generate a program. And then we're going to do the hill climbing step with 1 minus epsilon probability using the semantic space. So we're going to use the neighborhood function as I described here. So that's what this funny n here means. And the argmax is just the hill climbing step. But then with epsilon probability, we're actually going to do the syntax space. And the reason why we need to do both is that we don't want to get stuck in the space that's given by a small library of programs. So we want to be able to explore different parts of this space. So then once in a while, we're still going to go back to this underlying syntax space. OK. And then we get some program n. We check whether that's a local optimum. If it's not a local optimum, then we keep going. So keep going with the hill climbing approach. If it is a local optimum, then we just return as a solution from this one specific search. But we're going to use the same program to grow the library. So the more we search, the better the library will be. And then we're improving the semantic space. So the more problems you solve, we expect the semantic space to be better overall. Just because now we have more connections, you better approximate the semantics of the underlying language. Yes?
The library is a set of all programs that have ever been the best.
No, it's just the programs with different behavior. So maybe they're horrible, but they have a different behavior, so they go into the library. Because later we might be able to combine them with other programs so that we have the behavior that we're looking for.
I thought you only added them when they were an n star.
Oh, that's true. That's true. But then let's say that I run the search again, because we do a lot of restarts. Let's say I just run it again.
That have ever been the best.
Yeah, and I can get an n star that's much worse than the previous one. I'm still going to add it to the library.
Yeah, I see. That have ever been.
So this is how we try to approximate the semantic spaces. And we found empirically that it's way more conducive to search. I don't have plots here, but I can show you plots if you're interested. It speeds up the search like crazy, because now we have all these shortcuts in the space and makes it so much better. And some of the intuition is that as we do the search, we can ask, give me the next behavior, give me the next behavior, instead of give me the next program. Because getting the next program might not give you the next behavior, and that's just a waste of time. Especially in problems like reinforcement learning, that the evaluation function is very expensive, then you're essentially wasting your time. But then we need to reconcile with biology eventually. So why these neutral mutations can actually be good. We also showed that LLMs can actually give these agents like innate abilities, in the sense that because we have this programmatic representation, we can ask a large language model, give me a program for solving this problem. And even if the program is horrible, you can break it down into subprograms and add it to the library. And that speeds up search a lot already. Unfortunately, you can't do this with neural networks. You can't ask for a set of weights from a large language model. But you can do this with the kind of representation that we have. And I believe that the future here is really learning how to learn. It's the meta-learning approach, which is the idea of, given that I have a new problem, how am I going to face this new problem? Which programs from the library should I bias my search towards? And the way I see this is really an implementation of DreamCoder for sequential decision-making. And what we're missing is the recognizer in DreamCoder, because we don't have a probability distribution over the programs. And we need to learn this somehow. And it's trickier in the reinforcement learning setting, but it's something that I would love to think a little bit more about it and try to get it done. All right, so that's using this type of representation, and that's the first part of the talk. And I believe I'm actually doing well with time, so that makes me super happy. So let's go to the second part of the talk. And now our goal is, you know what? I want the search to be so easy that I do not want to do search at all. So I want to be able to do synthesis with no search. Or if I have to do search, I want the search to be super easy. So how can we learn programs by just using graded descent? So here we're going to be using neural networks and trying to take the programs out of the neural network. And so if we have a representation that looks like this, so this is just a program that ChatGPT generated for me, where I asked, can you generate a program that's clear that I need to create functions so that I can reuse these functions? So you have a bunch of sales at the top, and you want to get a discount of 10% if the total sum of sales is more than 500. So then it's clear that if we get this chunk of code here and we make a function out of it, then now I don't have to replicate all this code. I just make a function call. I want to be able to do the same with neural networks. So when we're learning from a stream of problems, we get to solve a problem, and then once we get the next one, we're going to learn from scratch. How can we reuse pieces of the neural network? We can't. Actually, I'm going to show you how. We can actually break down the neural network into sub-neural networks and reuse its pieces. Okay, so that's our goal moving forward. I'm going to show you for a very specific architecture and type of model, but we are working on a more expressive model. So if you're interested in the follow-up works that are not published yet, I'll be happy to tell you about it offline. So here's the model that we're going to be using. So it's just a multi-layered neural network, perceptron, where we're going to use a piecewise linear activation function. So we're going to be using ReLU here, but it could be something else. So the ReLU is given on the left-hand side. It has pretty much two states. It's either off, so it's 0, or it's going to be on, which is the right-hand side of this function. And that's what we're going to be using here for these two neurons, A1 and A2. And all that I need you to know is a forward pass in a neural network. Then it should be OK. But essentially, what I want to show you is that this A1 can be written in two different states. It's either going to be off if we're sitting on the left-hand side of the ReLU, or it's going to be the linear function provided as input if we're sitting on the right-hand side of the ReLU. So that's what we have here on the right-hand side. It's either this, the linear function of the input, or 0. And the same goes for A2. It's either the linear function or 0. So now what we can do is that we can rewrite this whole thing here as an if-then-else program as follows. Let's say that I'm going to get my A1 to be the linear function. And then if my A2 is also the linear function, then what happens is that I can rewrite the output of the neural network as a linear function of the input because I fixed both A1 and A2 to be linear. And the linear function of two linear functions, it's also a linear function. So then I can just rewrite this. And I actually have the math here, so I can give you a little bit of time to digest it. So the H value that's produced as output of the neural network is essentially A1 multiplied by theta 5, A2 multiplied by theta 6. And then I just replace A1 and A2 by the two things that I fixed here at the top. I just reorganize the whole thing, and I write it in terms of theta prime and theta double prime. And that's a linear function of the input that's given by the neural network. OK, so I'm just omitting the bias terms just to make the equations a little bit more friendly. But it doesn't change on the computation that we do here. But what happens in this case is that the neural network can be rewritten as this. Now we actually have a program. And once we have a program, we can apply the same trick of the sales Python program that ChatGPT generated for me. And I can get pieces of this program and reuse it elsewhere. So I can look for modules, functions, functionalities inside the neural network that was trained to solve a problem and try to apply it in other problems. So if you train an agent to solve one problem and you try to transfer to a new one, it's very unlikely that that's going to generalize. But if you look inside and you look for modules inside the neural network, these modules, they might generalize. So that's what we're after here. So let me just show you how many of these programs that we can get. Yes, please.
I was just wondering, I mean, there's an activation function inside alpha 1, inside A1 and A2, right, which is like nonlinear.
That's right.
So even though they're linear equations, when you're taking the outputs, A1 is a linear.
That's right.
So as much as these are modularized and they look linearized, they're not, right, because the activation function.
That's right. So if you look at this,
the parameters, that's all good, but a neural network isn't just the parameters.
Right. It's also the structure, right? So it's a combination of the parameters that you train and the structure of the neural network.
And the activation functions of the networks.
That's right. So what it boils down to is to a program that looks like this. This is nonlinear, right? This is equivalent to an oblique decision tree. So if you look at the ways of learning oblique decision trees like from the 80s and the 90s, you shouldn't pay attention to them anymore. Like you should just train real neural networks because it's identical to an oblique decision tree. And this is nonlinear. But you're right. If I get a different structure, I'm going to get a different program. So then maybe I still need to do search on the structure so that I get the program that I'm looking for. The search that we're going to do later is which of these sub-programs that we're going to be looking for. Because maybe I'm only going to get this part, but is this what I'm looking for? The module? Maybe not. So I should be looking for all possibilities. And I want to tell you exactly how many of these possibilities we have. Do you have a follow-up question? Yes, Stephanie.
This is a clarification question. I'm sorry. Did you have something else?
No, I didn't.
No, she didn't, yeah.
So if I understand you, what you're doing is extracting, putting as an output of the network, this program, right? And so you're not actually going into the neural network and inspecting it to find the modularity. You're making a copy of the output, and that's what you're working on. Is that right?
Yeah, so one way of seeing
I'm
this...
not sure if that's a criticism or...
No. It's a great question, because I was missing to say something. A different way of seeing this is that this program is going to grow very quickly. So there's an exponential number of branches that you have here. So one way of seeing this is that programs in this form can be written in a very efficient data structure. And this data structure is a neural network. So this is a one-to-one mapping. So then here you have something gigantic. But you can map onto this, and this is a very efficient data structure of writing this type of program. So it's a different way of seeing this, but it's a one-to-one mapping. I'm not sure if that helps. Maybe. Okay.
Well, I understand, at least.
Okay, good. But I want to give you the chance to see this again when we talk about neural trees. So let's say that this is the neural network that we train to encode a policy. So then let's say that the policy has, for an agent with two actions, like action 0 and action 1. So then we're going to use a sigmoid here as the output neuron. And I want to build the set of programs that also takes this into account. And it's very close to an oblique decision tree, but it's not exactly an oblique decision tree because at the leaf nodes, we use the sigmoid function. And here we're matching colors. So pink here, this neuron is corresponding to this node in the tree. And this neuron here is represented by these two nodes in the tree. And it's essentially the same if-then-else program, but with a tree structure. And then the function that you see at the leaf nodes is given by this neuron here as output. But then now it's easier for us to visualize what's going on. Because here I just placed this neuron, the pink neuron, as a root of the tree. But I could do differently. I could put the blue neuron as a root of the tree. So that's going to grow the number of different subprograms that we can look at. Notice that if I get, for example, this subtree is going to be different from the subtree that we have above. If I want to look at all possible subprograms that I have in a neural network, I have to account for all these possibilities. So in the paper that we wrote, we had a very complicated way of explaining this, and now I have a better one, of which I'm very proud of. So there's a very simple way of counting how many subprograms that we have here. We need to account for the following. We have 3 possibilities for each neuron. A neuron is going to be inactive. So for example, if I'm getting this subprogram here, then this neuron is inactive because we're following the branch where it's less than 0, so it's sitting on the inactive side of the ReLU activation function. Or a neuron could be active. So if we're getting this subtree, then this neuron is active. So then these are 2 possibilities for the pink neuron. And then finally, the neuron could be part of the program. So being part of the program is if I get the subtree, then the pink neuron is part of the program. So whenever I call this program, the pink neuron will make a decision, am I going this way or am I going this way? So I have 3 possibilities for each neuron. If I have n neurons, it's going to be 3 to the n. So then we have 3 to the n different subprograms. But then I was telling you, we're going to do this without search. But now I have 3 to the n programs, and we know that the size of neural networks, they're not going to be any small. So then it's a massive space. But I might have good news later. So let's move on. I have my agent. My agent is learning how to solve all these problems. I'm getting this stream of problems. I'm learning how to solve them. And once I get to solve a problem, I get a neural network that I can break down into sub-neural networks that could represent modules that could be reused across different tasks. But then I want to grow my library of different behaviors that I'm just going to equip my agent with. And there are 2 effects of doing this. So one effect is that the problem becomes harder because the more functions we have, the more functions the agent has to learn how to use. Well, it's more or less the same for us. Like when we're learning how to use an API, if the API is very large, then we need to spend more time learning how to use that API. But then the good thing is that the problem might become easier because some of those functions that you learn how to use might make it easier for you to solve those problems. So how do we balance this? How many of these subprograms are we going to get? And the good news is that we have a procedure to do this. It's a subset selection problem that minimizes the Levin loss. So the Levin loss is something that we used in the past for guiding tree search algorithms. It's like a cost function in a search algorithm similar to A star, but instead of G plus H, if you're familiar with A star, we use the Levin loss. But here we're using for the problem of selecting which of these programs that we're going to give to our agent so that the agent is going to take it as its library to try to solve downstream problems. But we're still going to evaluate all the programs. So we're going to be dealing with very small neural networks. But if you want to talk to me offline, I can give you some good news. We know more or less how to solve this problem. We just do not have final results yet, but I can tell you more offline if you're interested. So let me just tell you about the Levin loss. So the Levin loss is given by this function d over pi of n, where n is going to be a state that the agent encounters. So let's say that n is a state that the agent is looking for. It's a state where the agent is going to realize, hey, I'm done. I solved the problem. I maximize reward. I'm done. And then d is going to be the depth of this state. Essentially, the number of actions that you need to apply in order to get to that state. And then pi is the probability according to some policy of reaching that state. So then d over pi is essentially approximating the number of samples that you need in order to see that state. So we already solved the problem. So now I can, ask the question, if I was just learning how to solve the problem from scratch, how many samples do I need with a randomly initialized policy? And the Levin loss is going to give that for us. So let me just break that down for you. So 1 over pi is going to be the number of expected samples that you need, number of rollouts that you're going to make in order to see n. And then d is just the cost that you pay for each sample, because you're going to go through each one of the samples along the path. So then d over pi is the expected number of samples that you get in order to see n. By using this, now we can try to balance those two forces that I mentioned to you. If I give you a really good program that the agent can call, then I would expect this to go down. It's going to go down because the number of decisions is going to decrease. Now the agent doesn't have to worry about all decisions. Like the programs will take care of some of the decisions for me. But the pi is probably going to go down because now the agent has to learn about this new function that it has to call. So the probability of choosing that path will go down. So then we're trying to balance these two things. OK, so we just go through all the possible programs, 3 to the n, and we get the program that will minimize the most, the Levin loss. And then once we do this, we get the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and we're going to stop whenever the Levin loss goes up. So we're just growing our, start with an empty library. We're going to grow the library. Eventually, the Levin loss is going to go up because pi is going to be so small that it's not worth adding a new program to the library of programs. It's really like trying to capture diminishing returns here. OK, so that's a selection procedure. We call these DEC options because we're decomposing neural networks to get options. And let me just summarize this. So we're going to learn a policy to solve problems. Thank you. I'm still doing good with time, so this is great. We're going to decompose them into subprograms, and then we're going to select a subset of them so that we can use as options. And we're going to use these options in downstream tasks. So the options here are essentially the programs that we equip our agent with, and then the agent can use this in downstream tasks. OK, so that's a brief summary. I want to show you what it learns. So let me tell you about this, this problem domain that we have. This is what we call the combo grid. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what's going on. This is an MDP. It's not a POMDP, if you're familiar with this. But the sequence at the top, that's the sequence of actions that the agent needs to take in order to solve the problem. So the agent is sitting here in the middle, and it needs to visit all cells with a marker with the letter M. So that's what the agent needs to do. So let's say that we start here from left to right, and we'll apply these 4 actions. And then once we finish the 4th action, action 1, then we see the agent moving down. If we keep going all the way to the end, then we see the following. The agent moves up, up, right, down, left, and left. So do you know what's going on here? So this is, we call it the combo grid, because instead of just going up, down, left, and right, you need to apply a combo of actions so that you can move up, down, left, and right. So this is underlying dynamics of the problem that will have to make, you have to go through this dynamic so that you can actually move the agent in one of the 4 directions. So let me just give you the label so you know what's going on. So the first 4 numbers, this is equivalent to moving down. This is equivalent to moving up, up, right, down, left, and left. And I told you that this is not a PALM-DP because in the representation, we actually give the agent which actions that it has taken so far. We already know how to do this in the PALM-DP setting, but this is the setting where we still have an NDP, if that means anything at all to you. And here are the programs that we learn. So we train on a different problem, not this one. It's a totally different problem from this one. And then we extract modules out of this neural network. And what are the modules doing for this program? So we have a bunch of options. Each option is a program. And I'm going to cover what each option does. So for example, option 3, when called from the initial state, is going to take 4 actions, and it's going to stop right here. So it's really matching with going down. And we never told the agent that we have these dynamics of moving up, down, left, and right. We just discovered this by going through the subprograms of a neural network and finding this module inside the neural network. And then what we have for the remaining parts is something that looks like this. You're going to see that option 4 misses the first one. But it's still helpful to the agent, because then the agent will learn how to call this primitive action 1, and then it will call the option 4 to finish up this sequence. The same happens with down here with option 4 as well. So it's really learning modules out of the neural network. And that's super exciting, because it's going inside a neural network, and it's saying, you know what, there are subprograms within this program that can be reused across different tasks. If we just apply the policy that we learned in the previous task and apply here, it doesn't work at all. But if we break it down so that we can get all these functions, then now the problem becomes much, much easier to solve.
So what does option 2 correspond to? Because it seems it's useful.
Yeah, so that's a good question, right? So here it's going up, up, and here's going right. So remember that the options that we're learning, there are programs, there are functions of the input. So it depends on the state. Whatever the agent sees, that's going to determine what the option would do. So it's not a one-to-one mapping, like one option to going up, one option to go down, and so on. But it's nice to see that we can actually see some correspondence with the dynamics of the problem. All right. So learning programs, just to summarize. So we can use libraries of programs to approximate the semantic space of a language, and we do this by creating these shortcuts in this space so that we have this intuitive idea that we learn from the LEAPS paper, where you want to have this behavioral locality, and we managed to do this with the technology from the 90s, where we have this structure of the neighborhood function. And maybe somewhat surprisingly is that we might be able to use neural networks to do synthesis. Here, in this case, we're still going through this search procedure where we have to go through 3 to the n different subprograms, but we're able to extract some really helpful programs out of this set of programs, which is nice to see. And I just want to take the opportunity to also advertise that we're hiring at the U of A. So if you're interested, this is a great environment to do AI research. So we have 10 plus positions in AI plus X. Could be, for example, social sciences and AI, or remote sensing and AI, agriculture and AI, something plus AI. We also have 3 positions in our department, 1 in theory plus machine learning, software engineering and machine learning, and 1 in theory. So let me know if you're interested, if you'd like to chat, and please send your PhD students and your postdocs to apply. All right, folks, I believe I have 2 minutes for questions, right? And thank you so much. Yes, Alberta.